The city was a beast that never slept, its pulse a steady thrum of traffic and distant sirens. It was a city of shadows and sharp suits, where power wasn't just whispered about but enforced with cold, brutal certainty. And in this concrete jungle Marcello Volkov was a king. His name, spoken rarely and always with a mix of fear and respect, carried weight. He was a man carved from marble and ice, his dark eyes missing nothing, his smiles never reaching them. He moved through his world with an unshakable authority that made men lower their gaze and women's hearts beat a little faster, though never with any real hope. Tonight, his kingdom was a corner booth at the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant he owned, though its elegant facade hid that truth from the ordinary patrons. He was holding court with 3 of his most trusted men, discussing business in low, serious tones. The air around their table was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the unspoken danger that followed them everywhere. Across the room, a different kind of life was being lived. Elena moved between the tables with a quiet grace that was almost invisible. Her uniform, a simple black dress, was a little too big on her slender frame. She was a ghost in the machine of the bustling restaurant, her eyes downcast, her voice a soft murmur as she took orders and delivered plates. She preferred it that way. Being unseen was safer. It drew less attention, and attention was something Elena had learned to avoid at all costs. She collected empty glasses, her movements efficient and silent, a small frown of concentration on her face as she mentally calculated her tips for the night. Her section was next to the VIP area, and she couldn't help but feel the gravitational pull of the men in the corner booth, especially the one in the center. Marcello. She didn't know his name but she recognized his kind. Power rolled off him in waves. She kept her distance, focusing on a family celebrating a birthday, on a couple on a first date, on anything but him. It was Victor, one of Marcello's men, who snapped his fingers, the sound cutting through the din of the restaurant. Waitress. We're ready. Elena's head snapped up. She took a slow, steadying breath, her fingers tightening around her notepad. This was the part of the job she hated most. Approaching tables that looked like trouble. She walked over, her steps careful, feeling their eyes on her like physical weights. She stood before them, pad poised. Are you gentlemen ready to order? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcello leaned back, a lazy, predatory smile playing on his lips. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at her. He saw a mouse, trembling and insignificant. It was the perfect opportunity to amuse his men, to reinforce his own dominance in this small, controlled environment. He switched to Russian, his voice a low, smooth rumble. Look at this one, Victor. A little field mouse who's lost her way. I can almost see her heart beating out of her chest. Victor chuckled, a rough, grating sound. Probably scared she'll drop the plates. She looks like a strong wind would knock her over. Probably, Marcello continued in Russian, his eyes locked on Elena, who had frozen, her pen hovering over her pad. Don't bother asking for the specials, boys. I doubt she's smart enough to remember them. She'll just stand there, pretty and useless. The other men at the table grinned, enjoying the cruel sport. They added their own comments, a cascade of mocking words in a language they were certain was a secret weapon. Maybe we should order something simple. Something with no big words. Be nice, she might cry. Elena's face was a mask of stillness, but beneath it, a storm was brewing. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her notepad. She understood every single syllable. Every insult, every condescending laugh, landed not on the ears of a clueless waitress, but directly into the mind of a woman who had spent her childhood listening to her grandmother's folk tales in that very language. The words, my little star, and my brave girl, in her grandmother's soft Russian accent were a stark, painful contrast to the venom now being spilled. She forced her hand to move, scribbling meaningless shapes on her pad to keep it from shaking. She focused on a small crack in the wood of their table, a tiny imperfection in their world of polished cruelty. Marcello, satisfied with the performance, finally switched back to English. We'll have the steak. All of us. Medium rare. And a bottle of your best red wine. Nothing from the cheap list. He said it dismissively as if shooing away a fly. Elena simply nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned and walked away, her back straight, her pace measured. She didn't hurry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. She pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, the noise and heat enveloping her. She leaned against a cool metal counter for just a moment, closing her eyes, letting the anger wash over her. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of a tantrum. It was a cold, sharp, and solid thing. It was the kind of anger you could hold in your hand like a weapon. She took one deep breath, then another. Then she picked up a tray and got back to work, the echo of his Russian words burning in her mind. The game, though he didn't know it yet, had just begun. The kitchen doors swung shut behind Elena, muffling the restaurant's hum into a distant, manageable thing. For a long moment she just stood in the organized chaos, the cold steel of the prep counter a grounding reality against her palms. The cook shouted an order, a busboy rushed past with a clattering tray. It was all so normal, so brutally ordinary, while inside her, a silent, furious storm was rewriting the rules of her world. The Russian words, his words, played on a loop in her mind. Field mouse. Pretty and useless. They weren't just insults. They were a cage someone was trying to lock her in, and Elena had spent a lifetime refusing to be caged. She methodically went through the motions. She put in the steak order, her voice surprisingly steady as she spoke to the chef. She retrieved the bottle of wine, a ridiculously expensive one he had pointedly demanded, from the cellar. She polished a glass until it shone, her movements precise, almost ritualistic. With each action, the initial shock was being forged into a cool, hard resolve. This wasn't about being angry. This was about a line being crossed. He had assumed a position of superiority based on a language, a secret he thought he owned. And Elena knew, with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that she was about to shatter that assumption completely. Meanwhile, in the corner booth, the mood had lightened. The business talk had resumed, the incident with the waitress already a forgotten amusement for Marcello's men. They drank, they laughed about a rival's failed venture. Marcello, however, found his attention drifting. His gaze kept straying from his associates, scanning the restaurant. He told himself he was just being vigilant, assessing his territory. But a part of him, a part he wouldn't acknowledge, was looking for a glimpse of the waitress. There had been a flicker in her eyes, a stillness that didn't quite match the trembling fear he had anticipated. It was a minor inconsistency, a single note out of tune in a song he thought he knew by heart, and it bothered him. When Elena finally emerged from the kitchen, carrying the heavy tray laden with their sizzling steaks and the bottle of wine, the air in the restaurant seemed to shift. She moved with a new purpose, her earlier nervousness completely gone, replaced by an unnerving calm. She approached their table, her face a polite, neutral mask. She served the plates with a quiet efficiency, her hands steady, not a single clink of porcelain out of place. She poured the wine for each man, the rich red liquid swirling into the glasses without a drop spilled. She was the picture of perfect, subservient service. It was this very perfection, this total lack of reaction, that finally pricked at Marcello's ego. The game had been fun, but he felt an irrational need to see a reaction, to confirm his power over her. As she finished pouring his glass and began to step back, he leaned forward, a condescending smirk on his face. He decided to press one more time, to remind this quiet little mouse of her place in his world. "So, little mouse," he said in English, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Cat got your tongue? Or is speaking just too much trouble for you?" Elena stopped. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Slowly, very slowly, she lifted her gaze from the floor and met his eyes. The change was instantaneous and electric. The shy, downcast waitress was gone. In her place stood a woman with a fierce, unwavering intensity in her eyes. The silence stretched, becoming heavy, uncomfortable. Victor shifted in his seat. The other men stopped eating, their forks hovering in midair. Then Elena spoke. But the sound that came out was not the soft, accented English they expected. It was Russian. Pure, flawless, and icy cold Russian, spoken with the natural rhythm of a native. Her voice, no longer a whisper, was clear and sharp, cutting through the smoky air of the booth like a shard of glass. "The only trouble I have," she said, her words perfectly enunciated, each one landing with the weight of a slap, "is understanding why a man who wishes to be seen as powerful chooses to act like a schoolyard bully. It is truly a mystery." She paused, letting the meaning saturate the stunned silence around the table. Her eyes never left Marcello's. She saw the shock register there, the utter dismantling of his reality. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a blank, uncomprehending stare. "And for the record," she continued, her tone dropping to a deadly calm, "I understood every single word you said earlier. Every one. I hope your steak is as satisfying as your conversation." With that, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, turned on her heel and walked away. She didn't rush. Her footsteps were measured and firm on the polished floor. She disappeared once more through the kitchen doors, leaving behind a silence so profound it was louder than any explosion. Inside the booth no one moved. No one spoke. Victor was staring at the space where Elena had been, his mouth slightly agape. The other two men looked at Marcello, then quickly down at their plates, afraid to witness his reaction. Marcello Volkov, the man who commanded fear and respect with a single glance, sat perfectly still. The glass of wine he held was frozen halfway to his lips. The Russian words, his weapon, had been turned against him with a precision and grace he had never encountered. He felt a hot flush of something he hadn't felt in years. Not just anger but something deeper, more unsettling. It was shame mixed with a staggering, undeniable shock. The field mouse hadn't just bitten the lion. She had looked him in the eye and revealed she had never been a mouse at all. The carefully constructed world of his restaurant, of his own superiority, tilted on its axis. The only thought his reeling mind could form was a single repeating question. Who is she? The silence Elena left in her wake was a physical presence in the corner booth. It was thicker than the cigar smoke, heavier than the expensive wine. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant clatter from the kitchen, a world away. Victor was the first to move, slowly turning his head to look at his boss. Marcello hadn't flinched. He sat, statue still, his dark eyes fixed on the kitchen door as if he could see straight through it, following her path. The wine glass was still suspended in his hand, forgotten. The shock was a cold splash of water, but it was quickly burning away, replaced by a simmering, intense curiosity. He replayed the last 60 seconds in his mind, dissecting each moment. The calm way she had served them. The direct challenge in her eyes when she finally looked at him. The flawless, unaccented Russian that had dismantled his entire performance. This was no simple waitress. This was a person with a secret, a hidden layer of strength she had chosen to reveal in a calculated, devastating strike. The anger he knew he should feel was there, a hot ember in his gut, but it was utterly overshadowed by the need to know, to understand the puzzle she represented. He finally set his glass down, the click of crystal on wood snapping his men out of their stunned silence. Boss? Victor ventured, his voice uncharacteristically cautious. Marcello ignored him. He signaled for the check, his movements sharp, his mind racing 1,000 miles an hour. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. The steaks, once appetizing, now tasted like ash. The conversation was forced and died quickly. All Marcello could think about was the woman in the kitchen and the staggering gap between who she appeared to be and who she truly was. He paid the bill with a black credit card, not even glancing at the total, and left without another word, his men trailing behind him, understanding that the night was over. The following day the memory of her wouldn't leave him. It clung to him during meetings, interrupted his thoughts as he reviewed financial ledgers. That voice, that defiant, clear Russian, echoed in the quiet of his office. He was a man who dealt in secrets and power, and she was a living, breathing secret who had challenged his power on his own turf. He couldn't let it stand. Or, a quieter, more honest part of him whispered, he simply had to see her again. He returned to the Gilded Spoon just after the lunch rush had faded. The restaurant was quiet, the staff busy resetting tables and preparing for the evening. He saw her immediately. She was in a far corner, meticulously polishing cutlery and arranging it into neat rolls at a service station. She was focused on her task, her brow furrowed in concentration, a few strands of dark hair escaping from the simple ponytail she wore. She looked so ordinary, so out of place in the world he had just pulled her into, and yet he now knew that was the greatest illusion of all. He walked towards her, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. She didn't look up until his shadow fell over her workstation. When she did, her body went still. There was no fear in her eyes this time, only a wary, watchful caution, like a forest animal that had sensed a predator but was not yet ready to flee. She slowly set down the knife and cloth she was holding. "Elena," he said. It wasn't a question. He had made it his business to know her name. She simply nodded, her gaze steady. "Mr. Volkov." He was mildly surprised she knew his name, but then, of course she would. She was clearly far more observant than anyone had given her credit for. He gestured to a nearby table, away from the curious glances of the other staff. "Sit with me, please." It wasn't a request, but he had framed it as one. After a moment's hesitation, she followed him and sat, her posture rigid, her hands folded in her lap. He took the seat opposite her, studying her face. In the daylight filtering through the window, he could see the faint dusting of freckles across her nose, the intelligent light in her eyes that he had so foolishly mistaken for simple nervousness. "I owe you an apology," he began, the words feeling foreign and clumsy on his tongue. Apologies were not a currency he often spent. "My behavior last night was unacceptable." Elena's expression didn't change. She offered no forgiveness, no easy acceptance. She merely waited, forcing him to continue to work for it. I was rude and disrespectful, he went on, choosing his words with a care he usually reserved for business negotiations. I made assumptions about you that were wrong. He paused, leaning forward slightly. How is it that you speak Russian like a native? This was the core of it. This was the mystery he needed to solve. Elena considered him for a long moment, as if deciding whether he was worthy of the truth. My grandmother, she said finally, her voice soft but firm. She raised me. She was from Volgograd. Russian was my first language. It was the language of home. A flicker of something painful, something deeply personal, crossed her features before it was gone, locked away behind that wall of calm. Marcello leaned back, the pieces clicking into place. It wasn't a language she had learned in a classroom. It was a language of love, of memory. His mockery had been a violation of something sacred. The shame he had felt the night before returned, sharper this time. But with it came a surge of respect. She had protected that part of herself until he had forced her hand. It's a valuable skill, he said, shifting gears, his businessman's mind taking over. A rare one. He looked around the nearly empty restaurant. It's a waste of your talent. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. It's a job. It pays my rent. I have a different job for you, Marcello said, his voice dropping, becoming more intense. One that pays significantly more. I have a business meeting next week. The men I'm dealing with are Russian. My translator is adequate, but I need more than just words. I need to understand their meaning, their nuance. I need someone they won't see as a threat, someone who can listen to what is said between the lines. He saw the immediate refusal in her eyes, the instinct to retreat from his dangerous world. He pressed on before she could speak. It's one meeting. 3 hours of your time. I will pay you $5,000. The number hung in the air between them. He saw it land. He saw the calculations going on behind her eyes. $5,000 was not just rent money. It was a lifeline, a chance to pay off a debt, to escape a situation, to breathe. It was a sum that could change the trajectory of a life like hers. Elena looked down at her hands, then back out the window at the city. She was weighing the danger of him against the promise of that money. She was thinking of a future that was currently just out of reach. The war inside her was visible on her face. The fear of the unknown, the distrust of this powerful, unpredictable man, against the fierce, practical need to survive and maybe one day to thrive. Finally she looked back at him, her decision made. Her chin lifted in that same defiant way it had the night before. One meeting, she said, her voice clear. And the money is paid in cash. Before we start. A slow, genuine smile, the first one that felt real in a long time, touched Marcello's lips. She was negotiating. She had courage and she was smart. Agreed, he said. He stood, leaving her sitting at the table. As he walked out of the restaurant he felt a strange, unfamiliar thrill. The game had not ended last night. It had simply entered a new and far more interesting phase. The days that separated their agreement from the meeting were a strange, suspended time for Elena. Life continued as normal on the surface. She woke, she went to her shifts at the Gilded Spoon, she paid her bills, but underneath, everything felt different. The world had tilted, revealing a hidden, dangerous layer she had never been meant to see, and she had voluntarily agreed to step into it. The envelope of cash, thick and heavy, had been delivered to her apartment by a silent, grim-faced man. She had counted it twice, the sheer physical weight of it a terrifying confirmation of her new reality. She had hidden it away, a secret stashed behind a loose baseboard, a ticket to a future that felt both thrilling and terrifying. When the day arrived, a black car with tinted windows picked her up from her modest apartment building. The driver was the same silent man. He didn't speak, merely held the door open for her. The interior of the car was like another world. Soft leather, the faint scent of polish, a silence so profound it felt expensive. She smoothed her hands over the simple professional black dress she had bought for the occasion, a stark contrast to the luxurious surroundings. She was playing a part and she had to get it right. The meeting was not in a dusty back room as she had vaguely imagined, but in a sleek, modern high-rise office overlooking the river. Marcello was waiting for her in the lobby. He looked different outside the restaurant. He was in his element here, a king in his castle. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that accentuated his powerful frame, and his gaze was sharp, assessing the world as his domain. When he saw her, his eyes did a quick, professional sweep, and he gave a curt, approving nod. The men inside are named Petrov and Sokolov, he said quietly as they walked towards a pair of heavy wooden doors. They are old school. They will be polite, but they are sharks. Listen to everything. Not just the words. Listen to their tone, their pauses. If they joke, tell me exactly how they said it. Your job is to be my ears. Elena simply nodded, her throat too dry to speak. She took a deep breath and followed him in. The meeting was a tense, intricate dance. Petrov and Sokolov were exactly as Marcello had described, polite, with cold, calculating eyes. Elena sat slightly behind and to the side of Marcello, a notebook on her lap. At first she was a ghost, translating seamlessly, her voice a calm, neutral instrument. But as the discussion deepened, moving into complex terms of shipping routes and percentages, she found herself not just translating words but concepts. When Petrov used a particular Russian idiom that had no direct English equivalent, she didn't just give a literal translation. She explained its meaning, the subtle implication of a hidden thread it carried. Marcello would listen, his expression unreadable, then respond. He began to direct his questions to her, his eyes holding hers for a moment after she translated the answer, as if they were the only two people in the room who understood the true game being played. She saw the moment Petrov's eyes flickered to her with a new, wary respect. They had realized she was not just a translator, she was an asset. She was peeling back the layers of their language, revealing their true intentions. After 2 hours, a deal was struck, hands were shaken. The Russians left and they were alone in the vast, silent office. Marcello turned to her, a look of undisguised admiration on his face. You were exceptional, he said, and the words held a weight that the $5,000 never could. You saw what my usual translator misses. You understood the game. That was the beginning of a new routine. He hired her for another meeting, then another. Their relationship, which had begun in hostility, evolved into a sharp, professional partnership built on a foundation of mutual, if unspoken, respect. He started asking for her opinion after meetings. What did you think of him? He would ask as they drove away. Did you believe him when he said the shipment was delayed? And Elena would tell him. She would point out a nervous tic, a hesitation, a choice of word that felt off. He began to trust her instincts, this quiet woman who saw the world in shades of nuance he had been trained to ignore. One evening, after a particularly grueling negotiation, he didn't have the car take her home. Instead, he took her to a small, quiet Italian restaurant, a place no one would associate with a man like him. It wasn't a date, it felt more like a debriefing between two partners. They talked about the meeting at first, dissecting its moves and countermoves. But then, slowly the conversation drifted. He told her about the pressure of his position, the constant weight of expectation and the loneliness that came from never being able to fully trust anyone. He didn't reveal dark secrets, but he showed her the man behind the boss, the one who carried the burden of his world alone. And Elena in turn began to let her walls down brick by brick. She spoke of her grandmother, of the warmth of her childhood kitchen filled with the smell of borscht and the sound of Russian fairy tales. She spoke of the struggle after her grandmother passed, of the determination to survive on her own terms, of the constant fear of not being enough. She didn't ask for pity, she was simply stating her truth. Marcello listened, truly listened in a way no one ever had. He saw the incredible strength it had taken for her to build a life of quiet dignity with nothing. He saw the fierce intelligence she hid beneath a veil of shyness. And he felt something in his carefully guarded heart shift, a crack appearing in the ice. The shift from professional respect to something deeper was slow and undeniable. It was in the way he would gently guide her through a crowd with a hand on the small of her back, a touch that was both protective and possessive. It was in the way she would catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unguarded and full of a quiet wonder. It was in the way they could sit in a comfortable silence together, a rarity in both their turbulent lives. He was falling in love with her courage, her mind, her quiet strength. She was falling in love with the man he was beneath the armor, the one who was lonely and honorable in his own ruthless way, and who saw her not as a waitress or a translator, but as an equal. The danger of his world was a storm raging outside, but in the quiet spaces they created together, they had found a fragile, breathtaking peace. They both knew it couldn't last, that a world like his would never let them be, but for now, suspended in this impossible bubble, they allowed themselves to believe it could. The fragile peace they had built was a beautiful, impossible dream, and like all dreams, it was destined to be shattered by the harsh light of reality. The crack in Marcello's armor, the part that had softened for Elena, had not gone unnoticed. His world was one of constant vigilance, and a moment of vulnerability was a luxury that could be exploited. His primary rival, a man named Gregor who had been nursing a bitter grudge over a lost shipping route, had been watching. He saw the way Marcello looked at the quiet translator. He saw the way she walked beside him, not behind him. and he saw the perfect, devastating weapon. The plan was executed with cold precision. Elena was leaving a small grocery store near her apartment, a simple canvas bag of food in her arms, thinking about the book she was reading and the way Marcello had laughed at a comment she'd made the night before. She was, for the first time in a long time, truly happy. The thought was like a small, warm sun inside her. It was the last peaceful thought she would have for a while. A large black van, unmarked and sinister, pulled up to the curb with a sudden screech of tires. Before she could even process the danger, the side door slid open and two burly men jumped out. One clamped a hand over her mouth, stifling her scream, while the other grabbed her arms. Her grocery bag fell, an apple rolling into the gutter. The struggle was brief and hopeless. She was pulled into the dark, cavernous interior of the van, the door slamming shut, plunging her into a world of terror. The van sped away, leaving her ordinary life scattered on the pavement. They took her to a warehouse on the industrial edge of the city, a place of echoing emptiness and the smell of oil and dust. They bound her to a metal chair in the center of the vast, empty space. Gregor was there, a thin, cruel man with dead eyes. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. The threat was in the space around her, in the cold eyes of his men. He called Marcello, putting the phone on speaker so Elena could hear. Volkov, Gregor's voice echoed in the warehouse. I have something of yours. A little bird who understands Russian. I wonder what she'll sing for me. Marcello's voice, when it came through the speaker, was a low, controlled tremor of pure fury. It was a sound Elena had never heard before, a promise of violence so absolute it made her captors shift uneasily. If you touch a single hair on her head, Gregor, I will tear your world apart brick by brick. I will erase you. Then come and get her, Gregor sneered and ended the call. Alone, tied to the chair, fear was a cold snake coiling in Elena's stomach. But as the minutes ticked by, the fear began to harden into something else, a cold, sharp resolve. She was not a damsel in distress. She was Elena, granddaughter of a woman who had survived a war. She was the woman who had stared down Marcello Volkov and won his respect. She would not just sit and wait for rescue. She began to speak to the guard nearest to her, a young man who looked bored. She spoke in Russian, her voice soft, not with fear but with a conspiratorial warmth. You know, she said, he will kill you. All of you. He won't just kill you, he will make it last. And for what? For Gregor? A man who would sell his own mother for a profit. The guard tried to ignore her, but she kept her tone light, almost conversational. My grandmother was from Volgograd. She told me stories about real men, men of honor. Not thugs who kidnap women from the street. Is this the man you want to be? The man who dies in a dusty warehouse for a coward. She could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. She switched tactics, her voice dropping to a whisper. There is a back exit to this place, isn't there? Near the old loading bay. When the shooting starts, and it will, that might be your only chance. I won't tell anyone I saw you go. She was playing a dangerous game, weaving threads of fear and self-preservation, using her words as her only weapons. She was creating chaos in their ranks before the first shot was even fired. Meanwhile, Marcello was a storm given human form. He mobilized his men with a ferocious efficiency, his every thought a single, burning point. Elena. The cold, calculating boss was gone, replaced by a man possessed. He wasn't just fighting for territory or pride. He was fighting for his heart, which was being held hostage in a cold warehouse. He knew the location. He knew all of Gregor's holes. The drive there was a silent, screaming tension inside the armored car. They hit the warehouse like a force of nature. The doors exploded inwards and Marcello led the charge, his expression a mask of terrifying fury. The air filled with the sounds of shouting and scuffles. It was chaos, just as Elena had predicted. Through the noise and the confusion, Marcello's eyes scanned the vast space. And then he saw her. Tied to a chair in the center of it all, a single, still point in the storm. And what he saw next stole the breath from his lungs. One of Gregor's men was approaching her, a knife in his hand, perhaps thinking to use her as a final bargaining chip. But Elena wasn't cowering. She was speaking to him, her voice low and steady, her words unintelligible over the din but their effect clear. The man hesitated, his head cocked, confused by this woman who showed no fear. That moment of hesitation was all Marcello needed. He crossed the distance, a single fluid motion of brutal efficiency, and dealt with the threat. He was at her side in an instant, his hands going to the ropes binding her, his touch suddenly gentle. Elena, he breathed her name, a prayer, a vow. I knew you'd come, she said, her voice trembling only slightly. I told them you would. He cut her free, his hands cupping her face, his eyes searching hers for any sign of injury. The relief that washed over him was so profound it felt like pain. In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of his violent world, all his defenses crumbled to dust. "I love you," he said, the words raw and honest, stripped of all pretense. "I can't lose you. This life, it's dark. But you are the only light in it. Stay with me. Be with me. Not as my translator but as my partner. As my equal." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of release, of a final surrender to the truth that had been growing between them for weeks. She saw the man, not the boss. She saw the love, not the danger. She had faced the worst of his world and had not broken. She had fought back with the only weapon she had, her mind, and she had won. "I'm not afraid of the dark," she whispered, her hand covering his. "I love you, Marcello." He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in his entire empire. The chaos around them faded into insignificance. The threat was neutralized, the enemy defeated, but that was just business. This holding her was everything. He had found in a shy waitress a strength that matched his own, a courage that complemented his power. And she had found in a feared Mafia boss a man who saw her true worth and loved her for it. Their love had been forged in mockery, tested in danger, and sealed in a promise made in a dusty warehouse. It was a complicated, impossible love, but it was theirs, and it was stronger than any threat their world could ever produce. Their story is far from over. The world of power and shadows holds many more challenges for Marcello and Elena. To follow their journey, to discover how a Mafia king and his fierce queen build their empire of love against all odds, make sure you subscribe for more. New chapters of their intense romance are just beginning.